So I'm going to do something, as I did in the earlier service, that one should never do. I may regret it. That's never stopped me before. I'm going to change my sermon around. Not as I have it written. It's just, I think we need to hear the words of Isaiah. A few of the words that we heard already, and I think it would be good for us to hear part of them again. And from Isaiah, such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is that the only day what we're supposed to do on a fast? We humble ourselves and then we go and be our regular haughty selves the rest of the time? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush, and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose? And this is God talking through Isaiah. To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Last week, on the presentation of our Lord in the temple to Simeon and Anna, remember, I think we can meet and see God in ritual and piety. But it sort of has to be a two-way street. We can't just fast and expect everything to be okay. And to do our ritual and be our pious selves. Yes, we can meet God there. But we also have to be wanting to be transformed. We truly have to want to meet God in ritual and piety. So just before the gospel passage that we heard from Matthew is the Beatitudes. Remember the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. Remember, blessed are those, for theirs is, or theirs will be. The Beatitudes are about who we are as disciples of Christ, about our present situation. Now, some people think those are things we should strive for. But others think that Matthew is talking about the community who are there, who are wanting, have already decided to follow Christ. So there's some tension built into the Beatitudes. And at the end of today's pericope, we hear Jesus say that he has come not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Now, is Matthew telling us as Christians that we should keep the law, the Mosaic law? Scribes and Pharisees were meticulous in keeping the law. Well, Matthew is truly telling us that, and Matthew, remember, is writing for a community, not for outsiders, writing for a community. And many of his community were former Jews that are now following Christ. So if Matthew is truly telling us that, then Matthew is contradicting some things. Paul, for example, who said that after Christ the law is dead, or that if the law is still in effect, then Jesus came for naught. It contradicts Peter and the food laws, and it contradicts Christ himself. Christ broke many of the laws, especially the laws concerning the Sabbath, concerning food, clean and unclean laws for eating with people that, well, Pharisees and scribes certainly wouldn't have done. So there's some tension here as well. And Matthew is often considered the most conservative of the Gospels when it comes to the law of Moses and the Jewish traditions that surround it. And there are, believe me, lots of traditions that surround the laws. And I met some Christians today who think that we should follow the laws of Moses. Now, I think they may have different reasons than Matthew had, maybe, for stating that we follow the law of Moses. I mean, some people just want to prescribe a path because Jesus sort of gets in the way. So there's tension. There's tension built in here. So if I were to give my sermon a title, which I never do, I would call it tension. So what was Matthew saying about Jesus fulfilling the law? Because Matthew not only contradicts Paul and Peter and Christ, but he also sort of contradicts himself later on. If we assume that he is actually talking about the Mosaic law as being interpreted by the Pharisees and scribes. The Matthean scholar R.T. Franks believes, and I would tend to agree, that Matthew is saying that Jesus is that the Torah and the prophets were pointing to. And now the fulfillment of the law and the prophets by Jesus means that Jesus is now the interpreter of the law. And based on the dig in the end of the pericope we heard about the Pharisees and scribes, if you aren't more righteous than the Pharisees and scribes, you will never see the kingdom of heaven, then I think, yes, that's what Matthew is going for. Because, as in Isaiah's time, the passage from Isaiah was written after the Israelites were released from captivity in Babylon by the Persians. Darius, let them go back to Israel and Judah. They still had a few problems. They were fasting and they didn't feel God was listening to them. Because they were doing an interpretation that left something out. The same thing that the Pharisees and scribes always left out or seemed to have left out. And that was love. The human equation always has to include love. But there's still, I know, some tension there in the gospel. And in Isaiah, there's still tension. And there will always be tension in the gospel, in the Holy Scriptures. And why shouldn't there be? Tension is what causes things to happen. It's what causes movement and action in both mind, physical beings. So now that I've jumped all around, let me come back to the first part. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." Who is you? You are the faithful. The faithful, connected to the past, living in the present, looking toward the future. You are the salt, and you are the light. And when we talked about in our lectionary class this morning on this same gospel, salt and light are so commonplace for us that we tend to lose the emphasis that this places in this reading. I can go to the store and buy all the boxes of Morton salt that I need, or other brands. It's there. It's so common I can throw it on the doorstep, and that one time every 10 or 20 years the Macon has something. It's common. Light. I flip on a switch. As I imagine all of you, when you need to see, you flip on a switch. In the ancient days, salt was so precious that it was used for payment. Salary comes from the word means for salt. And without salt, even though we are, many of us, including myself, get more than I need, more than we need, without salt we die as biological beings. We are tied to it. From the day our primitive bodily ancestors walked out of the sea, with the blood of seawater coursing through them some 4 billion years ago, we are tied to the earth. Many ways. And salt is certainly one of them. From God's creating it, from the beginning, we are tied to the creation. So what's Jesus talking about? If salt becomes less salt, we throw it out. In the ancient times, they weren't as good as we were at processing and getting the last little kernel out of everything. So they gathered salt by evaporation. We still do that in many places. They flood the land and let the water evaporate. They gathered it. Didn't really process it. They took it. Well, in that, there was lots of impurities, as you can imagine. Other metals, other minerals. So sometimes the salt really wasn't any good. And they threw it out. And salt was and is used for preservation, purification, and for flavor. I have to have it in my mashed potatoes. I could go almost anything else, but I have to have salt in my mashed potatoes. So you, the faithful, like salts, are flavor to God's earth. You, the faithful, like salt, are vital to the world. You, the disciples of Christ. And you are the light of the world. The faithful. You are the light of the world. Light. Used to see in darkness, to illuminate our journey. And when we come together as a community, that city on the hill, all of our lives shine together as a beacon. Jesus says, who lights a light with which to see by? Be it a candle, an oil lamp, a flashlight, and then hides it under a basket. That's foolish. Join the community of the faithful and let your light shine by which to see and be a beacon to others. So Matthew's good news for us today is that we, the disciples of Jesus Christ, are vital to this world. Our following Christ and the wisdom gained in following Christ is necessary so that the world's path to being with God is illuminated and sustained by Jesus Christ as Christ chooses to interpret himself and make himself known to us according to the law and the prophets. And we give thanks for the new interpreter of the law, Jesus Christ. And blessed are you, the faithful who live in tension, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Amen.
Amen.